We're going to break down literally everything that comes to the bracket and the 2023 NCAA volleyball tournament. We've got a lot in store for you guys, so just stay tuned. And then at the end, we're going to do another snake draft, and we're also going to take some time for questions. So you can drop some in the comments now, but at the end, I'll prompt you guys again to leave some questions. Okay, Emily, so the bracket's out. The tournament starts tomorrow. What are your thoughts on the bracket and just the overall parity this year?
Well, I think like every year, you always have questions of why did this team get in? Why did this team not get in? I think the number one thing that we saw from this season was the parity across the board. And that's not even just for the teams who made the tournament. We've seen so many upsets of teams that we might have thought would never get upset, or we saw, sweeps across the country, or just a lot of takedowns that I feel like we necessarily haven't seen before. I just got kicked out.
Might have lost Emily for a second. We'll wait one moment. Technical difficulties, everybody.
One more time.
Let's see. Maybe I have to re-accept her. Okay. She's back.
All right, I got kicked out, but we're back.
No worries. She's back.
But on the parity, I think, we saw 4 Sunbelt teams get in, for example, and that's from a conference that hasn't had one at-large bid since 2011. This year they had 3. We're seeing the SEC, 8 teams get in this season. Normally we see those numbers from conferences like the Big Ten or the Pac-12. So we're seeing parity across the board, which is, I think, one thing that's going to make this tournament so exciting is along with that parity, there's going to be a lot of upsets.
Yeah, that's the thing that I was noticing when I was filling out my bracket. I was like, of course, when it comes to volleyball, there's perennial powerhouses and there's not a lot of national champions, right? Like there's only maybe, I don't know the exact number, but there's not a lot. But in the first few rounds, we had so many upsets in the who's to say it can't happen in the tournament? I was like, I don't know. I'm going to go for some upsets because why not? But it's just crazy how much the parity's growing.
Yeah, and it's so exciting, I think, just for the sport of volleyball in general. We're not just seeing those same 3 or 4 teams be good every season. We saw Kentucky win the first national championship for the SEC. Then we saw Wisconsin get their first national championship, and then Texas won last season. But it's not just the same teams that we're seeing in contention every single year. We're seeing those teams get tested early on, a lot of early upsets. Now, of course, when you're filling out your bracket, a lot of times you want to lean toward those bigger teams. But I feel like this season, there's a lot of teams that I wouldn't be surprised to even just see make it to like the Sweet 16, or teams that I also wouldn't be surprised to see in the Final Four.
Right. All right. So we've already discussed this a bunch, but I feel like we can't not talk about it right now. So Florida got in as a host, the top 16 seed at number 16. That's probably the most controversial thing when it came to the bracket this year. When you look at what happened with Florida this year, they had so many top 10 wins to start the season. They surged into the top 10. They were number 3 at one point, and then they lose Alexis Stuckey. They lose Kara Hudson. They lose Anna Dixon, and they start losing a ton of games. And you're like, okay, what is the committee going to do with this team? And they went with them. They went with the overall body of work and put them in as a seed.
Yeah, and I think it's tough to argue because, yes, Florida as a program got those wins early on, but Florida that got those wins is not the Florida that is currently playing. So to me, I want to have the teams that are currently in the tournament be seated or ranked or put in whatever based on how that team is currently. And I think that's what was frustrating for a lot of people was the team that the selection committee put into the tournament as a 16 seed, as one of the top 4 seeds, to a lot of people is not the same Florida team that we saw. Now, that's not to say that those wins didn't mean anything, and clearly a complete body of work. Like that team was rolling. That was a team that, I think we all thought was going to be in contention for a national championship. So I 100%. Do understand the validation and decision of giving them one of those top 4 seeds. It's tough to argue around, but then you look at a team like Georgia Tech and Penn State, who maybe a lot of people thought could have slid in there. But again, that's above my pay grade, and I'm not in those rooms making the decisions. So it is what it is.
as much as we wish we could, me and Emily are gonna
Yeah.
like just totally bust into the committee's room next year. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to. You're right. It's hard to argue. And when we talked to Holly, she was like, you know what, we didn't stray from our criteria, and it's been the
Yeah.
criteria year after year. And their primary criteria is to look at that overall strength of schedule and
Yeah.
win-loss records, and a secondary criteria is the last 10 matches. So it's in
Yeah.
consideration, but that's what it is. Okay, so that'll lead us to talking about, I want to ask what you think the toughest regional is. I think I know what you think it is. We think it's Nebraska, right?
Yeah, I go back and forth between Nebraska's regional, and I feel like, to be honest, every time I look at the bracket, I'm like, oh, but this quad's tough. But then I'm like, oh, but that one's really tough. I will
I
say just the
know.
left side in general is really difficult. I think when you look at the upper left for a team like Nebraska, or really any team in that quad, you've got Nebraska, you've got four SEC teams, four very good SEC teams that have shown that they're capable of taking down some other top opponents. Then you have Florida State, who won the ACC, that you can't sleep on, and a team like Georgia Tech, who I think is capable of beating anybody in this tournament. So I agree with you. I think that upper left is going to be really, really tough. And then that bottom left, I think, might be just as tough for a team. If you hope to make a Final Four, you got to go through Pitt or Louisville. And that's going to be something that I don't think any team wants to play either of those. I think Louisville's the most competitive team in the entire country right now. Pitt finds a way to win at any cost. And, Dan Fisher does a great job with that team, getting them going at the right time. But man, I think that whole left side of the bracket, I wouldn't be surprised to see 4 or 5 teams in there potentially make a Final Four and upset some other people.
I know. And you think about Pitt and Louisville having to potentially rematch for a
Yeah.
spot in the national semifinals. It just seems crazy because we've seen it go both ways this season, right? Like we've seen Louisville beat them,
Yeah.
we've seen Pitt beat them. It's like you don't know what's going to happen. And now that's what they have to go through to make it to the national semifinals. And I mean, it kind of stinks. It's kind of a great storyline. Like, I don't know what to call it.
It's yeah, I mean, I'm sure as a Pitt or Louisville fan, if you're watching, you're like, what the heck? I'd rather play them later on, or we shouldn't have this late 8 matchup. As a volleyball fan, oh my gosh, I'm pumped. I
I
love,
know.
and I know people don't like it, but I love seeing those conference matchups early on. And I know that's something the selection committee tries to avoid, but also when you think about seeding, these teams were placed because they had to be placed there based on their seeding,
Yes.
Pitt being
Yes.
4 and Louisville being 5. They couldn't have been moved. So it's not like, the regionally they had to put them somewhere else. It's always tough in that quadrant when you have number 4 versus number 5 going against each other. And of course, it happens to be Pitt and Louisville, 2 in-conference rivals who have been duking it out year in and year out. But I mean, I'm pumped for that. And I think if you're thinking about Louisville as a team, they're pretty mad they didn't get a top 4 seed, right? They want to host through the regional finals.
Yeah.
So this is their chance to go against a team like Pitt on their home court and potentially take them down and say, hey, we deserve that top 4 seed.
Exactly. And I think what you mentioned about the conference, like about the seedings, a lot of people kind of forget that. But as a reminder to everybody, there was a new seeding system that started last year. The committee now seeds 1 through 32. And then those are broken out across 8 seed lines. So an 8 seed, one of the 4 8 seeds has to go to one of the 4 1 seeds before that they can, so everybody's like, why are there so many SEC teams in the top left bracket? And why are, that's why.
Yeah.
For
And
everybody.
even to dive into that further, 1 through 16 is already planned out. Where you fall on that 1 through 16, you're automatically plugged in. So you can't change that. For example, that top left, you see a lot of SEC teams there because you have Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, who are top 4 seeds, meaning they're automatically placed there. There was nothing that the committee could do to avoid that.
Right. All right. So we'll move on to, we just did toughest regionals. This question's kind of loaded because I don't think there's actually an answer, but let's talk about the easiest path to the national semifinals.
Okay.
Obviously it's not Nebraska's or Pitt's. I don't think it's Wisconsin either. I mean, talk about having Penn State, Oregon, Purdue, all in that regional. Does that leave us with Stanford's? What do you think?
Yeah, I think, solely based on process of elimination, yes. I think I personally, as a team, not to say these teams aren't good, but I would probably rather face a Texas or a Tennessee than a
Yeah.
Kentucky, Pitt, Louisville, or Oregon. I think those are teams that we've seen this season that can really test some of the top teams. Whereas Texas, yeah, they played in the Big 12, which is an incredible conference this season, very, very deep. Same as Tennessee, playing in a very good conference. But also, I may rather face them than some of the other paths to potentially make a Final Four. So, yeah, I would say Stanford has the quote easiest path, but that is by no means easy.
Yeah, and if you look at that regional, it's crazy too. I mean, Texas
Yeah.
playing Texas A&M in the first round. You think about Arizona State. They were another one that maybe was a little bit earlier in the season on the verge of being a top 16 seed. They draw a
Yeah.
team like Georgia in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy. I mean, it's just so many good teams. And when you think of these first two rounds, I think it's going to be insane. So that leads me to my next thing. Let's talk about first round upset picks or matchups to watch in the first round.
Yeah, I think that the number one that you already kind of mentioned, Georgia, Arizona State,
Yeah.
that's the one that to me is the most intriguing because, Georgia's a team that was kind of on the bubble, barely made it in. But I think if you ask any coach in the country, any player, I think Georgia's the number one team that isn't seeded that you just absolutely don't want to play. I think, I said Louisville's the most competitive team in the country. I think Georgia's second right behind them. Tom Black gets that team fired up. And even having covered them this year, going to some of their practices, like this is a veteran team that wants to win. They're willing to do literally whatever it takes to win. It's also a team of veterans. You have someone like Casey Evans in her last year, Sophie Fisher, who is, I think, one of the best middles in the entire country, SEC player of the year. That's a team I don't want to play. And if you're Arizona
No.
State, who, yeah, they've shown they can take down some of the top teams, but man, I think Georgia might have the leg up on that one, which would be really fun.
Yeah, and I'll say, just if anybody looked at me and Emily's brackets, they do look a little bit scarily similar. We both picked Georgia to win in the first round,
Yeah.
then upset BYU and make it all the way to the Sweet 16. We did not exchange brackets, promise.
To be honest, I feel like because a lot of people are posting them now. I'm seeing a lot of people say the same thing. If you've watched
Yeah,
Georgia this year, you know how hard they can fight. I don't, I just picked them over BYU because I thought it would be kind of fun. But I don't know. It's
yeah,
also a matchup that I wouldn't be wildly surprised to see.
yeah. Let's talk some other first round matchups.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at my bracket really quick. Some that I would like to point out. Obviously, Texas A&M, Texas
Yep.
A&M, maybe not the greatest team in the SEC, but this is still a really good team.
They're
Not a
good.
great draw for Texas in the first round.
One note about that matchup too is it's going to be really fun to watch the middles because you have a player like Asia O'Neal, probably the best middle in the
Yeah.
country. Texas A&M's blockers are insanely good in the middle, so I'm really excited to see honestly like what Asia O'Neal is able to do against a player like Afena Kasapala, who's the best blocker in the nation.
Absolutely. Another one. I'm excited to watch Hawaii.
Yes.
They've got Iowa State. That's totally potential for upset there. Another middle. We're talking about middles a lot, but Amber Igidi. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't see her a lot because she's playing obviously in Hawaii, but this is another player very similar to Sophie Fisher that puts up both defensive
Yep.
and offensive numbers. 20 plus kills every match. It's crazy.
Yep.
It's her last season too, and I'm excited to watch that one.
Mm-hmm. One other one that I've got my eye on, Florida State TCU. And honestly,
Yes.
that's a tough draw for Florida State. You're playing a TCU team that's got a lot of spunk. Jason
Yeah.
Williams gets that team going, and you have a player like Melanie Parra, who not only is one of, if not the best server in the country, she's dang good on the outside. That's
Oh
not
yeah.
a team you want to play in the tournament.
Yeah, I was looking at TCU when I was thinking of my like dark horse teams to watch, and I was like, they were kind of on the verge of making it too.
Yeah.
But when you look at their schedule in the Big 12, I mean, they've been I like to pick teams that are just have experience playing the top teams in the
Yeah.
nation. And they have obviously they're in the Big 12, but like they have big wins too. Obviously
Yeah.
some bad losses, but they've got some big wins this season.
Yeah, and to me, I think a big win can sometimes tell you more about a bad loss. I think your potential
Yeah.
is, you can see what a team is capable of, and yeah, maybe they're not having their best night and get upset, but the teams that do well in the tournament normally, or the teams that are upsetting people, are those teams that during the regular season maybe had only one big win, but they showed that they could do it.
Yeah. Another first round matchup, Utah State, Minnesota. So
Yeah.
Minnesota's a team that we could talk about all day long. A team that has just a plethora of talented players, but was also on the verge of maybe not making the tournament this season, which is crazy because of how
Yeah.
successful they've been in the past. They're under a new head coach, Keegan Cook, but this is a coach that led Washington to the national semifinals not too long ago. They've got
Mhm.
Taylor Landfair. I mean, this is another team that I picked to upset first and second round.
Yeah, I did too. And in that first round, yes. And I don't know if it's much of a quote upset against 6 seed Utah
Yeah.
State, at least in my mind. I've seen Minnesota play a lot. I watched Utah State a little bit over the end of their regular season. But man, Minnesota's got some pieces, and they've got veteran pieces. Someone like Taylor Landfair, who in the beginning of the season wasn't that good. She doubled her efficiency during conference play, which is outstanding for an outside hitter. And then you have a libero with Kylie Murr, who is as feisty as they come. It's her 5th season. She wants to go out on a win. That's a team that I don't want to play during the tournament because they were heating up as conference play ramped up. And that Creighton game that we could potentially see, assuming
Yeah.
both teams win. Oh, I'm so excited for that one because, Creighton beat Minnesota on their home court in 5 sets earlier non-con play. It was an awesome game. And now Minnesota gets to potentially hand them the favor back in the tournament when it matters the most on their home court.
Absolutely. I swear it's like these rematches just happen in the tournament and it's
So
just
many.
beautiful. It's like thank you to the volleyball gods because it just keeps happening. But yeah, Minnesota's one to watch out for sure. Any other dark horse teams you think we should look out for? And by that I mean unseeded.
Yeah, in terms of unseeded, I would say those are my picks. I know you mentioned TCU. I'd throw them in as well with Georgia and
Yeah.
Minnesota. And I don't know if these count as dark horse teams, but maybe dark horse in the sense that I wouldn't be surprised to see them in an Elite Eight or even surprise people in a Final Four. Honestly, all those 5 seeds are incredible
Yeah.
teams. Dayton, Penn State, Georgia Tech, and Arizona State. Dayton has won, it feels like, every single match for the last 2 months. You
Oh
have
yeah.
Penn State, Georgia Tech, and Arizona State who have all beat some of the top teams this season. So, they could turn it on at the right time and maybe get one of those Elite Eight upsets or Sweet 16 upsets.
Yeah. We'll go into this. It keeps leading me into my next topic. I want to talk fun potential matchups. And in this instance, you brought up Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
One that I would just be so excited to see a rematch of is
Yeah.
Wisconsin Penn State.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that game earlier in the season, I think, Wisconsin wasn't at full health. They were without Anna Smrek. They went through lineup changes. Penn State beat them on their home court, which was such a fun game. I remember I was there and the atmosphere was like, I literally felt like I was deaf. But I think Wisconsin also feels like they let that one slip away. And even though they weren't at full strength, I think it would be really fun to see a rematch this time on Wisconsin's home court. And I cannot wait for that one. And honestly, that entire region, I think, would just be fun to see, some of those matchups, even a Purdue, Oregon. I think just in terms of
Yeah.
style of play, those are 2 teams that I love watching. Like, Oregon, fast, it's finesse, it's, good passing, good serving, just a good ball control team. And then you got Purdue, who's just like thunderous outsides that can just overpower even some of the best blockers. So I think that quad, I feel like there's so many games I'm looking forward to, even early on, like Purdue, Marquette, Penn State, Kansas. There's some good ones up there.
Oh yeah. I mean, Purdue, Oregon, you're thinking about one of the youngest teams in Purdue and I mean, Oregon is half and half, but they've got a lot
Yeah.
of older players on that team and a lot of
Yeah.
veterans. Same with Washington State.
Yep.
Washington State, Dayton, I have no idea what to expect. Hannah Pukas, one of the most experienced. No, Hannah Pukas is for Oregon. You got Argentina Ung for Washington State
Yep.
and just Magna Yehlajeva, just great players. I'm so excited to see that matchup.
Yeah, and even looking at that quad too, I think one that could be a sneaky good game is USC Pitt. Now,
Yeah.
USC all season always depends on whether Skylar Fields is healthy. When she is
Yeah.
healthy, hands down, she's the best outside in the country. It depends if she's healthy or not, but man, I would not want to ever play a healthy USC team because they can be scary. And if she's playing and she's firing, you got to watch out if you're Pitt.
Yeah, and their middles are pretty good too. I watched them
Yeah.
at Washington State or at USC go down 2-0 and then reverse sweep and I was like, "Whoa, this USC team can be pretty scary. They had a freshman that was out the entire first half of the season. And when she
Mhm.
came in, their coach was just telling me that it just completely changed their entire team dynamic. It allows for better passing. It's just a completely different rotation. And once she's been back, they've been kind of a different team and really impressive. Another matchup and quadrant, Stanford
Bringing you guys with
and
me real quick.
all right, we gotta relocate. 1 second. Stanford has the potential of taking on either Texas or
Mhm.
Tennessee. Texas Tennessee is one that we both were like, should we go for an upset here? I mean, I don't
Mhm.
know what to do in terms of Texas and Tennessee.
Well, look, I think these are two really similar teams just with how they play. You look at a team like Tennessee, they have one of, if not the best offenses in the entire country. They have one of the best setters. And I think that's going against a Texas team that all season long we've seen falter at times. We saw them get swept by K-State earlier.
Yeah.
I think people don't know what to make of Texas because they're not the same Texas that we saw earlier in the season. Whereas Tennessee's getting better and better every single match they play, especially as conference play went on. They just lit it up and they have some really good pieces that are tough to stop. I ended up picking Tennessee just because I feel like they have players that I think really turn it on in those big moments. You know, someone like Janaisha Moore has been leading that team so
Yeah.
well and has really deep tournament experience to bring them on. I also just thought it'd be kind of a fun upset for
Yeah.
Tennessee to get.
I know, and when we pick those upsets, it's not like we don't think Texas can win, right? I mean, like Maddie
Yeah.
Skinner is one of the best outsides in the country, and now that she's playing six rotation, she's evolved even more, and she's just so impressive. She could take over a game. Same thing with Asia
Yeah.
O'Neal, but when you look at that matchup, it's just like it can go either way, and like you got to pick eventually, right? It's a bracket, so we're going with that. I think that that could go either way. I think that's going to be one of the most fun games there is. And then any of those teams matching up with Stanford
Oh yeah.
would be just great.
Yeah, both of those teams matching up with Stanford. And then if we want to project even further, I know we talked about this before the season started, but if we get a Wisconsin Stanford game, oh my gosh. I like these are the two teams from the beginning of the year. I think everyone said these are probably the teams that are at least going to make a Final Four, if not be in the national championship
Yes.
match. And I think it's really fun that we could see this in the Final Four with both those teams matching up, just based on how many veterans they have and how well oiled they've looked.
Yeah, that's who I have in my national semifinals when I filled out my bracket. And then I've got Nebraska and Louisville on the other side. So let's talk championship prediction. I've got Nebraska and Wisconsin in the championship. I know you do too, because I looked at your bracket. Imagine if we get that. I mean, the
Oh my
third
God.
rematch between the two teams. You've called both of
Yeah.
them, I think, this year.
Yeah, called both of them in very different games. The first one we saw, it was a tight back and forth battle. Nebraska ends up coming from behind in set 4 to push a fifth set and wins it on their home court. One of the best wins that we've seen from Nebraska all season, if not the best, in a 1-versus-2 matchup. And then at the end of the year, they head to Wisconsin, and that Nebraska team just didn't look like themselves. And if you watch that game, I think it was easy to tell how physical and overpowering Wisconsin looked. But to be fair, that didn't look like the Nebraska team we've seen all year. That's, to me, that was when the youth kind of played out for really the first time. I do think though, if this team being Nebraska is able to make it to the national championship, I'm always going to pick the team that's more experienced and more physical. And I think, to be honest, I think Wisconsin is one of the most experienced and physical teams in the entire country. So I'm going to give it to the Badgers. I hope it's an incredible game, something similar to what we got in 2021, in the
Yeah.
most epic volleyball match of all time. I just, to be fair, we've been surprised by Nebraska all season, and these freshmen, they know how to turn it on. They know when to step up. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them take down Wisconsin. But I also think those Badgers can get dialed in very quickly. And when they turn it on and they're at full strength, I'm not sure if there's a team that can really hang with them at their best.
Yeah. Speaking of the Nebraska freshmen, it's almost like they play like they don't have pressure on them. Like they're
Oh,
not
it's
the number
great.
one team in the nation. Like they're just a
Yeah.
bunch of freshmen out there that are just want to win. And that's what it comes down to sometimes. Like sometimes you're like, no way a
Yep.
starting group of of mostly freshmen aside from like Merritt Beeson and Allie Batenhorst or Lindsay Krause and Lexi Rodriguez, but a lot of those
Yeah.
starters are freshmen. And it's like, you don't think that they'd be as good as they are, but they just are.
They figure out a way to win. And to be honest, that's all it takes. All you have to do in a volleyball match is win 3 sets. Doesn't matter what happens in the other two. And, in that first matchup between Wisconsin and Nebraska, I think we learned a lot of what those freshmen are made of. For example, Harper Murray, she's hitting negative up until the end of the fourth set. And then all of a sudden she turns it on, goes 7 for 9 in the fifth set, finds a way to win. And that's what you want to see from young players. You want to see how they do in those big moments. Yeah. And I think, sometimes that's where experience can come in because you've been in those big moments. But also sometimes when you're young, on the flip side of it, you've got nothing to lose because you haven't been there before. You haven't lost those big games. So you might as well go take a big swing. And that's what's been so fun about this Nebraska team all year. Watching them grind it out, find ways to win, whether it's a top 5 game at home or on the road or in a loud environment. They just find ways to gut it out, which has been so fun.
Yeah, and their defense is just obviously the best in the country, and that's just so hard to beat. When you think of the left side of the bracket, the national semifinal there, if we say Nebraska's in, who do you think has a better chance of beating Nebraska, Pitt or Louisville?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Or what those matchups might look like in terms of, Pitt has a lot of young players too with Babcock and Stafford.
I was gonna say, honestly, it would be kind of fun to see Pitt play Nebraska just because of the youth and how many like storylines there are, and that's when we'll figure out what some of those freshmen are made of. Personally, I think it would be really fun to see a Louisville Nebraska matchup just for the storyline of Danny Buzzboom Kelly, who played at Nebraska, played under John Cook, trying to take down her former coach. And I think in that situation too, it kind of feels like all the pressure would sort of be on Nebraska there. And, to be fair, they felt that the entire season, being ranked number 1, being undefeated up until last weekend. In terms of matchups, I kind of like Louisville, Nebraska a little bit more just because I think Louisville has players like an Anna DeBeer who I think are able to turn it on in a way that a lot of other people in the country can't and completely take over a match. And I love in those gritty, Sweet 16, Elite 8 games where you're trying to make it to the Final Four, seeing those elite players step up. And I really want to see that from Anna DeBeer.
And you think of defensively too, having Elena Scott on Louisville's team, another one of the best. We talk about Lexi Rodriguez a lot, but she definitely deserves some recognition when it comes to best liberos in the country.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, she's absolutely incredible. I don't think there's any question of whether she's one of the elite. And I mean, in my mind, easily a first-time team All-American.
Oh, for sure. Okay. Speaking of players and top players, we always do this. Let's talk player of the year and freshman of the year picks. We've been doing it since the beginning of the season to the middle of the season. Now heading into the tournament, we all know this is going to depend on how far these players take their teams. But let's talk player of the year.
All right. I got a long list here, and I would say my number 1 is Sarah Franklin. What she is able to do for her team in every facet of the game, whether it's offensively, she's hitting .330 during conference play against some of the best defenses in the country. And that's in system or out of system. Like, she finds a way to clean up junk. She is absolutely incredible. I think she's one of the better passers too. A lot of rotations. She's taking up so much of the court because of the passing rotations that they have. I've been so impressed with her this season. I think, to me, she's the best player in the country. I think it'll depend how far Wisconsin goes, which, to be honest, I expect them to make a Final Four unless they get upset. We'll see. Secondly, I would probably have Kendall Kipp. She's shown that she has the ability to completely take over a match. She's an incredible leader for that Stanford team. And I will say, a lot of times, the people that vote on this will vote for some of those more experienced players and want to send them out on a high note too. So not to project, but I think, Kendall Kipp is going to be one of those players that I think is well deserving of that National Player of the Year award. So we'll see if she gets the nod. And then, other players that I would consider: Merritt Beeson, Maddie Skinner, and Anna DeBeer. And then the other one we always talk about, Skylar Fields, but USC, won't be in contention for a Final Four. At least I think, unless they go on a deep run. We'll see. But she is most certainly should be in that conversation with some of the best players.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the year, it would have been Kendall Kipp, no arguments. I don't think I would have expected to be saying this. If I had a vote right now, I'm voting for Sarah Franklin, just because I just haven't seen a player like her this
Yeah.
year. Kendall Kipp is unbelievable, but the only thing when it comes to the two of them, Kendall Kipp might have, I have to take a look at the stats, but Sarah Franklin, Wisconsin's offense is really balanced. And a lot of
Yeah.
times it's going to come to padded stats, and Kendall Kipp might have a little bit more in that regard.
Mhm.
So that's one thing to pay attention to too.
Yeah, and that's important to think about, especially for a Wisconsin team that runs a 6-2 where you always have three hitters up.
Yeah.
It takes away a lot of swings from a player like Sarah Franklin. But as the season has gone on, they've used her more and more, and that balance has become a little bit more skewed towards setting Franklin because they know literally in any situation, front, backcourt, in system, out of system, she can put a ball down, which I think has been really fun to see. And just a storyline for her. In the summer, she was told she may never play volleyball again. They found blood clots in her legs.
Yeah.
She went into emergency surgery and was back for the first game of the season against a ranked team and put up a team leading kills. And just a storyline there for a player to play now even better than what we've seen after having been told she may never play again. I mean, it would just be honestly one of the best stories in not just college volleyball, but in college sports.
Yeah, if she takes her team to the Final Four, I think the award should be hers.
Yeah.
Freshman of the year, we've got just an onslaught of freshmen this year. You've got the
Yeah.
Nebraska freshmen with Bergen Riley, Harper Murray, Lainey Chaboy. You've got the Pitt freshman, Olivia Babcock. What do you think?
Yeah, I think to me, there's kind of five that really stand out. You mentioned Olivia Babcock. I think she is more than deserving of the award, but I do think there's players that maybe would get it over her. One, Kennedy Martin at Florida. I know she didn't get SEC Freshman of the Year as Brooklyn DeLay did, who, to be fair, DeLay is an incredible player. She does things that you don't see a lot of freshman outsides do. But man, Kennedy Martin needs to be in that conversation. She has led that Florida team that has gone through so much, and she hasn't missed a beat. And the numbers she's put up have been really impressive. I personally think the best freshman in the country right now is Bergen Riley. And we talk about hitters so much. And not to say that it's not difficult coming in as a sixth rotation outside, similar to what Chloe Chacoin's done at Purdue or Harper Murray at Nebraska. But coming in as a freshman on the number one team in the country, leading your team to a 27-0 at the time season as a freshman setter, I think has been the most impressive body of work that we've seen from a freshman this year because she adjusted to the speed of the game so quickly. She's a really good leader for that team. She keeps them calm and composed, and she's able to put her hitters in good situations a majority of the time where a lot of setters struggle there. And yes, she has good hitters that can clean up junk sometimes, but a lot of those are also inexperienced to where they're still learning the speed of the game as well. So for me, my pick would go to Bergen Riley just of what she's done for this entire season. But, I wouldn't be surprised to see it go to a Harper Murray or a Kennedy Martin or even Olivia Babcock.
And how about Chloe Chacoin?
Yeah, well, she's been the most impressive, I think, just standing at 5'9". She might numbers wise be a little bit below some of these others, but man, she's fun to watch. If you haven't watched Purdue play, you're missing out because she's fun. They list her at 5'10". It's a soft 5'10". She's explosive. She's fun. She rips a topspin serve from the back. She's
out of the
watch.
gym.
Oh yeah.
Jumps out of the gym. Reminds me a little bit of like a Claire Chaussee with the same kind of build and how she jumps out of the gym. Okay. Before we get to questions, we're going to do a team draft. So we always do a fun snake draft at the end of our lives. So we always do our like all-star teams, but since it's the spirit of the NCAA tournament, we're going to each draft 5 teams. And what we'll do is we'll keep track this time. And if the team we pick gets a win in the tournament, that's a point. Or we can figure out the scoring system later, but we'll start with just drafting teams. So we'll go 5 each. All right. Do you want the first pick or the double second?
I'll take double second.
All right. Okay. So I'm going
to
go.
This always stresses me out so much because I'm like, don't make the wrong pick, but there's no wrong picks to make.
I know. Okay. So I got first pick. I'll go Wisconsin.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm going to go Nebraska and then Louisville.
Okay. I'm going to go Stanford.
See, this is where stuff gets interesting now.
Because
it's like, all right, who do you think?
You're like, oh, you want to go by your bracket, right? Because that's what you think. But at the same time, if one of your teams gets upset, so say you have Nebraska and I picked Kentucky, I could get more points there if Kentucky upset, like, things like that.
And
Or I could
thinking
pick
about
Pitt here.
for that we've already picked both of our Final Fours, like now which teams are most likely to upset to make a Final Four?
Right.
I didn't think
Okay.
about the strategy here. Now I'm stressed.
Okay, so that means I'm going to go with Pitt.
Okay.
You got 2.
Okay, since you picked Wisconsin, I'm going to pick Oregon.
Yeah, I figured.
And I want to pick Kentucky, but since I picked Nebraska, is that smart? I'll go. Yeah, I'll go Kentucky. I'll go Kentucky.
Okay.
Whatever.
Okay, so you got 4. I have 3. So these are my last 2 picks. Okay, geez, this is hard. Okay,
These are the hardest by far.
Yeah, I'll go Tennessee
Okay. Yeah.
and Purdue.
Okay. I will pick Texas then, because then I'm countering your Tennessee. Okay, this is going to be fun.
Okay. So I've got Wisconsin, Stanford, Pitt, Tennessee, Purdue, and you've got Nebraska, Louisville, Oregon, Kentucky, Texas. Okay.
All right.
Again, we will post this and we'll keep track during the tournament and we'll see who wins. Okay, now that we've kind of reached the end, if you guys want to go ahead and drop some questions in the comment section, we can answer a few. So I'll just like kind of call them out as we see them.
Someone asked how to pronounce my last name. It's Ehman.
Perfect. I'm surprised they weren't asking how to pronounce my first name.
It's Michella, everyone.
Yeah, not Michaela, not Michella. Okay, someone likes your bracket, Emily. Okay, thoughts about Kansas State being left out. Yeah, that was one that me and Emily have discussed. Emily, I'll let you take this. That was a tough one.
Yeah, my thoughts are we got to stop weighing the RPI so heavily at some point. I do think if you're way down in the RPI, probably 60 or above, yeah, maybe you don't deserve to be in there. But for a K-State team that was 59 in the RPI, 49 in the KPI, took down 6 top RPI top 50 teams along with Texas and 2 wins over BYU. If you prove that you can beat 3 of the top 16 seeds that you have hosting, I think that, there's no reason why that team shouldn't be in. Yeah, you might have 3 wins that were over 100, but against some of these other teams, I don't want to call anyone out, but that have no wins over top 50 teams, have 0 big wins, maybe didn't have any bad losses. I still think you got to reward the team that has shown you from their body of work that they deserve to be in the tournament because they've beaten multiple teams that are in the tournament.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it comes down to what do you value more, big wins or bad losses or just a team that kind of takes care of business as the season goes on with a less strong of a schedule. And that's kind of what it came down to with some teams that got in over Kansas State. And we might not necessarily agree with it, but that is what happened. Same thing with an NC State that had a big win over Louisville.
Yeah, and that's why it's like, what's the point of getting the win over Louisville if you don't let that team in? And especially for a team that was 44 in the RPI. That's above our pay grade. We're not in the room in there, but I would have had K-State and NC State in if it were up to me, which it's not.
Again, just kidding. We're not going to be in there. Okay, I'm looking for another question. Okay, let me know if you see any good ones, Emily. What do you guys think about Georgia Tech? We talked a little bit about them. I think Georgia Tech's a phenomenal team. If you have Bianca Bertolino on her game, and she's a fantastic server with just this insane jump serve. So if they can keep their opponents out of system, I think that they can play really well and have a good chance of upsetting some people.
Yeah, and honestly, what I like about Georgia Tech is how balanced they are. It's not just Bertolino; they have other pins that carry such a heavy load.
Oh, we might have lost Emily one more time. Hold on, guys. Waiting for her to rejoin. Sorry, guys, we're having technical difficulties
Phone's too
today.
hot.
Oh, her phone overheated. Okay. All right. So you know what? If that's the case,
Oh,
we're just gonna go
goodness.
ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you everybody for joining us. And sorry we didn't get to as many questions as we maybe wanted to. We had a phone that overheated. So thanks for joining, guys. We've got a great tournament in store. I think Emily's going to be calling a few games herself. So get ready for the tournament. Starts tomorrow. And yeah, thanks for tuning in.